From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and we have a big dog today. We are joined by Attorney General Ken Paxton. Thank you for coming on our show, General.
Anthony, great to be on. Thanks for having me. It's a good time to be back.
This is incredible. We're talking to conservatives. As you know, this show, we focus deep dives on policy and a little bit of politics and the truth and the how and why of what's happening in Texas. And everybody wants to hear from you. Everybody wants to hear about what you're doing. There's almost too much for us to take. So tell us a little bit. You've been Attorney General now. What are the 5 highlights of your career that you're interested in? As AG, you were a very successful senator and state rep.
I started 11 years ago in 2015 after being in the House and the Senate for 12 years. And I think one of the early highlights for me was starting our human trafficking division and going after Backpage.com and really focusing on that issue and trying to make it a relevant part of this office. I think we've had an impact on the legislature. I think I can now prosecute human trafficking. That's something that we couldn't do when I got here. It's something I've been working on trying to get done for years, the whole time I've been here. And I think we've also had an impact on national legislation and national efforts to stop human trafficking. So I feel really good about that. The other part of my job that it's been, I think, successful and I think it matters for the survival of our country. We sued Barack Obama 27 times in 2 years, and we sued Joe Biden 107 times in 4 years. And that's important because we were defending the Constitution. We were defending states' rights and the constitutional provisions that reflect those states' rights. And we were defending really Congress's ability to pass legislation and not the executive branch stepping in and making up laws either through agency action, executive guidelines, or by other, orders. I think some of the other things we've focused on are some of the big tech cases, whether that was Google and Facebook recovering really large amounts of money for the state, for actors that were doing really bad things that have a lot of resources. The opioids cases were probably where I spent more time than anything, trying to recover really money for kids and try to stop these companies from hurting our citizens, particularly children. I have too many friends that their kids are not alive today because of some type of overdose. And anyway, those are some of the highlights. I also think some of the lawsuits against Big Pharma, whether that's Pfizer or whether it's Eli Lilly or some of our Maha stuff where we're going after, fluoride manufacturers and toothpaste and things that harm kids. We went after Tylenol. So that's probably another area that I'm proud of our accomplishments.
General, thank you for sharing that. In fact, as I heard them, some of them I had forgotten. I think there's a reason Trump has called you the most successful attorney general in America. And frankly, I had forgotten about Backpage. Backpage was the single largest website or entity moving human traffic and children in particular. And you guys shut it down. It was a worldwide website, as I understand it, and the Texas AG shut it down. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, that's correctly. So we had teammates in that. We had the feds, and we also worked in California, but it was 97 countries that they were operating in. They were headquartered in Dallas. And the ironic thing is that the building that they were in, the offices that they used are now, or at least after that occurred, were used by an anti-human trafficking group that stepped in to take it over. So we arrested the guy, put him in jail, and stopped that organization. So that was very satisfying. Obviously not the end of the problem because we still have the problem, but we're still focused on it. And now that I have the ability to prosecute it as of September 1st, we have resources to do that. And that is something that very rarely gets prosecuted by our local DAs. They don't either have the resources or the interest of prosecuting it.
Wow. General, that's just incredible work. Thank you again as a father of 2 daughters. That's so important. It's also shocking to me that the state of Texas didn't permit the Attorney General to prosecute human trafficking or adults who sexually harm children. More and more, I am, as an observer who just assumes that it is illegal to transition a child, for example, in Texas. I think that's another area that the AG's office led on, and now there's state laws. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on? And were you as shocked as I am to learn that you didn't have the power to intervene by the legislature in either of those subjects?
Well, not just that, but there's lots of crimes being committed, financial crimes, other crimes, shoplifting that are not being prosecuted by some of the district attorneys. Some of the biggest counties are controlled by DAs that were elected by George Soros. And those are places that we can't seem to elect Republicans. I'm talking about, Travis County in Austin or Bexar County or Dallas County. And the problem that we have, because the legislature doesn't provide a backup, those DAs can allow any crime they want. They can also be part of that crime. And there's nothing any one of us can do about it. I don't have the authority. In most states, there is a way for the Attorney General to have some type of jurisdiction, concurrent jurisdiction, as it relates to criminal matters. So if the DA gets out of control or doesn't do their job, we have a backup. The legislature has resisted that. The DAs are probably the most powerful lobby in the state, whether it's by fear or whatever. They've been able to stop the legislature from broadening the authority of the Attorney General. And as I leave this office, it's one of the biggest disappointments I have is that while we've gotten our ability to prosecute voter fraud back, we've gotten our ability to prosecute human trafficking and some abortion crimes, there's a lot of crime that is going to go unresolved, and there are going to be some DAs that are committing crimes, and literally they can brag about it. They can brag about committing crimes, and there's nothing that can be done in Texas. They are allowed under our laws to commit crimes.
It's just shocking. I mean, look, it was similarly shocking to me that the little boy in Dallas whose father, fought the estranged mom, who's the pediatrician, about the gender transition for, I think, a 7-year-old at the time. And the mom was like, hey, the monsters, they only go after boys. You're a little girl, aren't you? Don't you want to be safe from the monsters? Just in pure indoctrination. And we didn't have something on the books to stop that until you and others led that charge in the legislature.
Yeah, so that was one of the, we were really maybe the earliest out starting to fight that. It was almost like a trend that was unstoppable. And we started fighting it. We started putting out opinions that saying that we thought it was child abuse. I think that was the first thing that happened. The legislature, after noticing the sort of the work that we were doing, actually adopted laws that allowed us then to go after some of these doctors and fight it. So we've done that. We've gone after doctors, and some of them have had to give up their medical license. We've sued the Biden administration over this, and we're successful now. Now Robert Kennedy we're working with him sort of on the same train now. So it's nice to have the federal government understanding this issue in the right way, not trying to push transitioning our kids when their brains aren't developed yet and they can't make, decisions like that would affect the rest of their lives.
It's shocking to me that the feds have allowed it, and there wasn't already a law on the books. And we've had
not only allowed it, but promoted it. They were promoting it, and that's why we had to sue the Biden administration. We were able to stop that. They were trying to jam it down our throats and force us into it, and it's hard to believe, given the fact that these kids are, young and they're making radical decisions that are undoable. That'll affect the rest of their lives.
How were they promoting it? Give us insight into that.
So they were trying to force funding, and they were trying to stop funding if states didn't participate in their trans agenda. So they used the mechanism of funding and defunding to promote it, and it was wrong. And we sought to stop it, and we did.
You guys have, over the last, 6-8 years, perhaps longer, but my observation has been the last handful of years, have filed some piece of litigation. And the whole mainstream media and beyond have been like, oh, look at how nutty that is. Look at that. It's crazy. And then boom, you're winning like over and over, and then changing federal law and stopping the Biden administration from force feeding gender transition of minors to us. Look, thank you for what you've done. Godspeed. It strikes me because Ted Cruz is conservative, and we've got other conservatives at the federal level. I don't know how this was permitted to exist at the federal level. I'm as stumped as you are at the legislature, at the state level, not already codifying a lot of this into law, but we sure appreciate what you're doing. Tell us about Google and Facebook, because those were, big tech. There's a big dispute out there. They're clearly tracking everything. They're clearly reading everything, seeing everything. And you turned around and got, $1 billion plus out of each of them for Texans. What exactly did they do?
So Facebook, and this was a case that I actually brought to the office that some of the people that used to be in my office didn't think was such a good idea, but it turned out it was a pretty good lawsuit. And they were stealing our faces, and they were stealing our voices. And in Texas, that's illegal. they are not allowed to take that voice or facial geometry without permission from who they're taking from. They were not getting permission. They were also not allowed to keep it. They were keeping it. They were not allowed to sell it, and they were selling it. So they were violating the law in 3 different ways, and we sued them for that. There was no doubt that they were violating that law. And the challenge of taking on, a big firm like that is you having the resources, because there's a lot of out front, as you know, from being a lawyer, there's a lot of costs associated with that, experts and, millions of dollars of time and effort taken on, and you've got to have a pretty stout legal force. So we hired outside counsel to do that, and we worked out a pretty, I think, unique model where they put up all the costs. They were going to take if they won, they lost, they got nothing, but if they won, they got 10%, not 35 or 40. And we got 90, but we had no investment in the case other than, some of our time. So it turned out that model worked out really well and has been a good model for our state, because it's provided a lot of revenue for the state, stopped a lot of bad things, and the state has never had to fund any of it. So they're getting an infinite return on their investment because they have no investment in this.
That's incredible. I didn't understand it was 10%. I know it's still a big number, but shoot, who cares if $9 every 10 come to the state taxpayer?
There's been some criticism of how big the number was, but I'm like, you want to build a formidable legal force when you're taking on the Googles and the Facebooks and the GMs of the world, because they have literally unlimited money to hire as many attorneys as they want, and they don't take you seriously unless you have something similar to fight with. So you want to have the best team in different types of lawyers that can aid and aid your efforts to take them on. And so that costs money. And in my opinion, this was a unique and creative way to do it that had never been done, where we get 90, they get 10, but they still make a lot of money, but we have no risk. Like if we lose, there's no out of pocket cost. The state doesn't take any risk. I think, if I could do that model, which I'm continuing to do over and over, I don't see why every attorney general in the country doesn't do it.
Agreed. Look, the flip side of that is I'm a lawyer who works on contingency, and I'm not taking cases for 10%, because if I lose and my client doesn't recover anything, I eat all the time, I eat all the costs, and I'm fronting the costs as well in my little, primarily trucking litigation business. However, it is not limited to 10%. That's an awful lot of risk by the lawyers. They have to be real confident they can deliver. So look, that's value add for the taxpayers, particularly when they're just taking our faces and our voices. I'm really troubled by that. So some of these are the historical. Like your office just does so much. It's incredible. But in the last 3 days, I've seen headlines of your office, and I think you specifically, detaining illegals in Houston. A, is that true? And then B, tell us about it.
Yeah, so that's something that I've worked on for a long time. When I was in the House, I pushed forward an agenda that would allow Texas to do these what are called 287G agreements with federal enforcement officials related to immigration. And so I was familiar with the program when Trump came into office. I heard it mentioned, and so we signed up as the first state entity to get involved in the 287G program, where my officers, which we have, over 200 officers, can now detain illegals and help the feds deport these people. So that's what we're doing. And that story in Houston is accurate. We detained, I think, approximately 50 illegals and turned them over to ICE. So those are 50 people that were here that shouldn't have been, and they're getting deported.
And if you're just joining us, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and you're listening to Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is clearly a big dog. We're talking about a lot of the policy and substantive issues in the conservative movement affecting Texas right now, and his office in particular. So all right. So now you're out detaining illegals and helping ICE, the exact antithesis of every effort in Oregon and Minnesota. Texans are stepping in. And are you the first attorney general in the history of Texas to do this?
I am pretty sure that's true. I may be the first attorney general in the country to do it. I'm not sure about that, but I'm pretty sure I'm the first attorney general in Texas.
And, all of our adult lives, we heard that you can't fully secure the border. You can't really reduce anything. A wall won't do anything. I got to say, basically just the November election, I don't think Trump had come into office, and it almost stopped. That's my observation. You probably have more.
No, it was remarkable. All these things they said wouldn't work, and it was even before he came into office. As soon as he was elected, the numbers started declining because they were all afraid of deportation now. So yeah, they'd spend all this money, pay the cartels. Under the Biden administration, that was all copacetic. Everybody loved it. The Biden administration loved it. They were working with the cartels and moving people once they got to the border. But once people realized that Trump was coming into office, they stopped coming because they knew even if they got through under Biden, which they could relatively easily, they were going to be deported. And so they stopped wanting to pay for that.
Which is why it's important to continuing deporting people. Like, just straight up, because deportation is probably the event that stops illegal immigration. I'm going to lead with that. You don't have to agree with that premise.
No, I agree with that because it creates, because otherwise once you're here, you spend the money to get here, you're here. If there's no deportation, you got no downside, right? You don't lose anything. But if you are going to spend that kind of money, which, the cartels were charging $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a person. That's a lot of money, especially for people from some of the countries that were coming here. So yeah, knowing that you spend all that money and that you have a decent chance of getting deported changes the economic incentives of that and creates a real downside for people. So I do think deportation is crucial to stopping illegal immigration.
It creates such a disincentive that I'm with you, and I'm glad you're out there. And hallelujah to the 200 or so folks you have at the AG's office who are trying to keep us safe. I mean, look, we got so many gangs and cartel leaders and frankly ISIS members coming across that southern border under the Democrats. The first administration under Trump was really successful, but nothing like the last 13 months or even 14 months since he got elected. It's just shocking.
No, it is shocking. And what's amazing, the Biden administration, we had probably close to 20 lawsuits against them for illegal immigration, whether that was cutting down our fence, it was building the border wall, trying to, move our buoys out of the way, not building the wall. But the reality is, it just enforcing the law has made a huge difference. And that's exactly the opposite of what the Biden administration actually announced on their first day in office. Think about this. Joe Biden announced himself that we were no longer going to deport people. Now, we sued him on day 3 and we stopped that, but that was the message to the cartels, like, hey, we'll help you. Just get them here. You don't even have to run anymore. You don't have to hide from Border Patrol. You just do a little handoff and you can make your $10,000 per person. And that kind of policy obviously was designed to get people here, not keep them out.
Well, and the handoff being between the Biden administration and the cartels, right? Implicit in what you're saying. And the fact that the audacity of the Biden and the Democratic machine to come in and say, not only will we not deport them, but we're going to start removing the very small portion of the wall that the Trump administration actually built, right? We're going to tear it down and make it. How audacious is that as a symbol?
Well, and here's the thing. It was funded by Congress. They were directed to build the wall. So there were monies appropriated and they decided to let all of those materials rot. They had contracts with contractors that were getting paid to do nothing. And they generally just dismissed the law and said, we're going to spit in the face of what was passed by the legislature. And we're not going to use that money the way we were told to use it. That's what we sued them over. And then they were directed to go ahead and start doing it. But they did it, slowly and they didn't do much. So they had no interest in following federal law.
It's incredible. And look, we keep jumping back from state and federal, but your office I didn't understand the scope of the Attorney General's office until you became the AG. And whether that was me paying more attention or me being ignorant or you using the office in such a way that's impressive, I just didn't understand the scope. So the one that jumps out of me of late is when the state House Democrats fled, right? They tried to stop redistricting. They fled. And what I remember, if I'm pulling of the memory file correctly, was you, hey, I'm going to go out and arrest these Democrats who try to leave the state. Am I remember that correctly?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on your comment about not knowing the authority of the AG's office. When I got there, I asked for the summary. I said, where's the memo that tells me what the authority of the Attorney General's office is under the Constitution, under statute? And it didn't exist. And I was like, well, how do Attorney Generals know what they can do if there's no guiding document that has the provisions related? So I said, here, I want you guys to put that together, and then I want it that way, and then I want to compare it. And I also want a budget based on it that we're only paying for things that we're allowed to do. And if we should be doing other things we're not, let's do them. And so once I had that in hand, it gave me a sense of what I could do. And I think we have creatively used that document to do things that maybe no other attorney general has done in the country or even in Texas. So that's my first response. I don't think most people, because they don't know, there's like over 1,000 statutes that direct the attorney general to do things. And I don't think anybody knows all those statutes until I had them put this together so that I could understand what is my actual role, what is my authority, what am I allowed to do, what shouldn't I be doing. So that's how that started. And as far as going after the Democrats, if you look back at the history of how that all occurred, we had different lawsuits trying to remove people. We had several different actions going on, but the one that actually worked was going after Beto O'Rourke's nonprofit that was funding all of this. They were paying for their fines. They were paying for their travel. They were paying for their hotels. They were paying for their food and lodging. As soon as we got an injunction, and by the way, the 15th Court of Appeals ended up blowing that up, but it was too late. We got the injunction. Those guys came back the next day because all of a sudden now they're going to have to pay for it. So it actually worked, even though the 15th Court of Appeals, I think, really made a huge mistake by helping Beto O'Rourke, put that back into place. But by then, the genie was out of the bottle.
So I don't want us to lose the 15th, so make sure I come back to it. But I want to tease this out a little more. Effectively, Beto O'Rourke was aiding and abetting. Is that the issue?
Yeah, and he was doing it inappropriate because it's a nonprofit. He was saying that he was using that money for like somehow campaign contributions, which is a little confusing because it's a nonprofit. But he was actually using that to fund them, to pay for things. So it was a deceptive trade practice, basically. And he was telling people, he was misleading the people he was getting the money from. They were actually going directly to, these were payments directly to legislators who weren't, doing their job in Texas.
They were being paid to stay out of Texas and affirmatively not do their job.
That's
against
exactly
the
right.
interests of the taxpayers.
Yes.
All right. So look, these judges have screwed up so many times, and I have watched over the years. I didn't keep an inventory of them necessarily, but they'll knock your office, and then they'll end up being flipped either on the law, that they're just flat wrong on the law, or by the ballot box. As I recall, the Texas Court of Appeals? Criminal Court of Appeals? Like, how many of those guys lost after they tried to strip you of your power to prosecute election fraud?
They all lost. Because three out of the 9 were up, and they'd been there, like, I think the minimum 12 years. Some had been there. One had been there over 20 years. One had been over there 30 years. And we ran 3 people who had never run before for office, other than I think one of them. And we ended up winning all 3 of those races. I don't think that's ever happened in Texas history, where we took out 3 statewide incumbent Republican judges in a primary for not doing not just not doing their job, but for overruling, 71 years of precedent that directed the attorney, and overruling a statute that the legislature passed in 1951 that directed the attorney general to prosecute voter fraud. Had they been successful in the long run, we would have lost Texas due to these supposed Republican judges that basically said that the Constitution required, because of separation of powers, that the attorney general never go into court, because he's not allowed to be in court because he's in the executive branch. It was one of the most ludicrous arguments I've ever heard. And had the Court of Criminal Appeals been actually right on their reasoning, that means every attorney general in the country since, the beginning of our country had been violating the Constitution based on separation of powers.
That's insane. I didn't understand that was their reasoning behind it. Thank you for sharing that with us. And if you're just joining, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and we're here with Ken Paxton, Attorney General. Ken Paxton talking about his office of the last 10 years and his fight for liberty on our behalf. I didn't intend to take us over here, but I'm going to, because these judges, they've just shocked me by what they've done over and over and over. And Texas Supreme Court, not relative to you, but the listeners of this show have heard a lot about, they came out and said values, religious values and family values and community values are reversible error in damage fights of civil law. They're all Republicans, many of them appointed by Abbott, and they're saying religious family values should be outlawed. It's just insane. A truck driver kills your wife or your little girl, and you can't get in there and talk about any values. But I'm seeing this from judges in particular going after you and your policies. So what is happening here? I mean, is this the boogeyman of Texans for lawsuit reform?
I think they had a lot to do with getting some of these judges appointed. I don't think they did on the Court of Criminal Appeals. Those guys, I think Soros had a big part of. Even though they were Republican, no one really knew who they were, so you could put anybody in there. So I think Soros had played a big part. I think the 15th Court of Appeals, which has been relatively disappointing in some of their rulings and has been sometimes a thorn in our side in trying to effectuate good policy for the state of Texas, and they just come in just like on this Beto O'Rourke case. It was shocking to me that they came out and supported Beto O'Rourke. You would think that when we've got a temporary restraining order from a district judge in a case where it's clear that Beto O'Rourke is violating state law and he's lying to consumers, that you wouldn't have a Republican court come in and say, no, Beto O'Rourke's fine. Let him go back and do that stuff. Let them run from the state of Texas. Let him mislead consumers. It's all fine. That's a Republican court, and I don't know what to say, but that was a really bad ruling.
Well, look, I'll take it farther. If it was a Democratic court, the law is the law, and it ought to be applied honestly and fairly. Go figure. I guess I'm threading the needle a little bit here, but I have just watched the largest lobby group in the state of Texas, Texas for Lawsuit Reform, stand up a whole bunch of Democrats and stand up a whole bunch of rhinos and attack a lot of conservative issues. And my observation was they were largely behind the impeachment effort that failed, that was all exposed as a fraud. Do you agree with that, or am I wrong in the premise?
No, there's no doubt. I mean, I've got we got some subpoenas were actually followed. A lot of them weren't during the impeachment. A lot of the subpoenas were ignored, even though they were directed from, through us to Dan Patrick, and then Dan sent them out. Unfortunately, TLR ignored all of our subpoenas or ignored the subpoenas from the lieutenant governor and got away with them. But we got the information, some of the information from other places like Karl Rove. And it was clear from those emails amongst the parties that TLR was involved in my office in sabotaging me, and they were very much involved in the impeachment. Now, when I ran into Dick Weekly, he tried to convince me that, he wasn't a part of it. But I said, Dick, look, I saw the emails, so you can tell other people what you want. But you and I both know that you guys were a part of it, because I've got the emails and the text messages to people in my office and to people outside of my office. They were the ones that encouraged Rick Perry to write that. They actually wrote the op-ed where he criticized and said I should be, impeached. So, obviously Rick Perry was a part of it as well.
Well, that's what jumped out at me, right? I heard all this, we had nothing to do with it, they had nothing to do. And folks, there's this somewhat obscure group, but everybody's hearing more and more about them. Texas for Lawsuit Reform. They've deployed like $100 million over the last 25 years. In campaign contributions are a constant force. I was very supportive of them, and frankly, I still support their good policy. As an individual, I'm looking at things at policy, but there was a lot of buzz around the legislature that, they're behind this effort, just like the judges, taking nutball positions on law just because it was Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton, of course, ran against the moderate speaker way back when. He's been a champion and a conservative warrior. And the kind of mainstream policy folks don't always appreciate that. So this really powerful group, TLR, Texas for Lawsuit Reform, said, we don't have anything to do with this. This is not us. This is all the activities of Republicans. And then it actually goes to trial, and subpoenas go out, and all these people start advancing evidence of email strings where, here, we did this draft editorial for the Wall Street Journal that the guy needs to be impeached and he's a bad just attack. And what I heard for the first time ever, clearly I wasn't paying close enough attention, is this civil justice reform group ignored all the subpoenas. I mean, the irony of that, because they didn't turn over all the evidence, even though they got exposed.
They didn't, Anthony, they didn't turn over any. So they're all about, picking good, wanting the right justices, wanting the legal system to be supposedly fair and less plaintiff friendly. But when push came to shove, they didn't even honor a subpoena, issue, a legal subpoena. They just ignored it. They never gave us the information.
Wow.
So I mean, it's one thing to say you want a fair judicial system, but when you're asked to be a part of it and you're directed to do something, you just go, you spit in the face of it and go, no one's going to make us do this. Even the lieutenant governor isn't going to make us do this. And so they didn't do it. They never followed through on their legal obligation to turn over the information. We never got it.
But wow. And the listeners of this show have heard a lot about some of the bills that TLR tried to pass last session. Two in particular. One, change the law on truck drivers, right? So truck drivers driving 80,000-pound vehicles, they have a different set of laws. It's just more dangerous. I was a licensed CDL guy and drove them, and I know it. So current law in Texas says, hey, if you can't read or speak English, the jury automatically learns that, period, if you cause a crash and hurt somebody. And it also says if you're driving on a foreign CDL, like a Cuban CDL, automatically learn. Well, TLR and Jeff Leach from your area, Collin County, tried to pass a bill to change that. Juries don't automatically learn if the guy can't speak English, can't read English, or is driving on a foreign CDL. Frankly, it may have passed because this group is so powerful, except in like April, Trump came out and said, my executive order is you got to enforce the law. These guys have to read and write English. It was just shocking. The other thing they tried to do was put damage caps on Chinese corporations and all these bad actors, sexual predators. $250,000. A little girl lives. She gets $250,000. That's it. If you kill her in the assault, then you can get $1 million on non-economic damages. I mean, just shockingly bad policy. So, there's been a real change for the worse there, and for them not to honor a subpoena troubles me at the deep, deep level.
It tells you they have a little bit of not a lot of disdain for the actual legal process. They don't think it applies to them, that they give enough money to politicians that they don't actually have to follow a directive from
the law.
The law and
the
from
courts.
the courts and the judge. And so that shows you a little bit of the arrogance that I'm talking about that concerns me, that they're trying to be the ones that have, the greatest influence on the judicial system, and that when they're involved in it, they don't respect it.
Yeah. And they're really being exposed as giving millions and millions of liberal D's and others. Well, let's move forward for that and talk a little bit at least about what's happening in the campaign, because best I could tell, about $40 million has been spent by the Austin Swamp attacking you. And at best, it's a tie between you and Senator Cornyn. And what I have heard, some of his statements to the effect of, "See, I'm still in second. Wesley Hunt is not overtaken." So, what's your read? We are in a campaign cycle, and 50-ish days out from an election for you're running for the Texas Senate in the primary. You and Senator Cornyn, the incumbent, and Wesley Hunt, a congressman, I think a first-time congressman who I don't know. I know most of the folks. What's happening in this election?
So I got in April the 8th, and it's I think Senator Cornyn, who has been in office since I was in college, and I'm 63 now, is running for his 5th term. And you probably are aware, most people are not, that there are tremendous advantages on the fundraising side for incumbents. And so we have limits on the federal side for $7,000 a person. Only half of that can be used in the primary. So you can only raise $3,500 for the primary from every person. On the other hand, the incumbents have unlimited access to money. They can raise. Otherwise, how would John Cornyn have spent $45 million since July if it was limited to $3,500? It's not limited for them. So McCain-Feingold, John McCain was trying to get money out of politics, but what he didn't tell you was he only meant it for the challengers, not the incumbents. The incumbents have unlimited funding.
That's
clear. That's clear. And even, any congressman has access to the same committees, but as a non-federal employer or elected official, I don't have access to that. So even with all of that, I still think we're up in the polls. I think we're up, more than people think we are, and we'll know better in February where things sit. But, with all of that money, the best Cornyn can say is that, as you said, he's in second. He's holding Wesley off only because Wesley's run out of money, as from what I can tell. And, even with that, he's had to worry about, finishing third. And that tells you a lot. I've been asking this question, Anthony, since April the 8th to every group that I go to. And I ask them, John Cornyn is running for a 5th term. No one's ever done that in Texas history. Not Sam Houston, not LBJ, not John Tower, not Phil Gramm. No one's ever done a 5th term. So what has he accomplished in his 24 years? And I'll give him all of his time in service, including district judge, Attorney General of Texas for one term, and also a Supreme Court justice. What can you name one good thing that he's accomplished? And if I asked you that, Anthony, I don't know what you would tell me, but I can tell you I have not gotten one answer to that question. In the thousands of people that I've talked to, no one's ever given me an answer, including his supporters. And then I say, well, take 2 weeks of my term in office. You pick the 2 weeks, other than the 2 weeks of Christmas and 1 week of Thanksgiving. And when they suspended me, I guarantee you, any 2 weeks you pick, I've accomplished more in 2 weeks than he has accomplished good in his entire 40-plus year career. So my argument is, if that is true, which no one's disputed, why would we reelect John Cornyn to his, fifth term and almost 50 years in office?
That's a pretty compelling question, and obviously a very powerful way to ask it in the form of a question. Yeah, 30 years in the Senate, I just think is unnecessary. And that's not an endorsement of anybody. I'm taking no position in this race. Rather, it's a generic statement about any elected official at the federal level. We're a citizen-led republic, or at least we should be. And 30 years in the House or 30 years in the Senate is just too much to me. There's 33 million Texans, and I bet there's a high number of them who would be exceptional leaders in either of those chambers. That's a powerful narrative that you just laid out. I'm struggling to think of something, and I don't mean that in a pejorative. I'm sure he's taken a lot of conservative votes, right? 24 years, you can't not. But no marquee issue. And I think this is what has helped you always in your conservative career. You say Ken Paxton, some group said, oh, he challenged a liberal speaker, even though it was like a kamikaze, he was brave. And then some other little 13% say, that guy is the single biggest champion for life, right? And now some good portion of the electorate is like, oh, yeah, Trump says he's the smartest guy in the world or the best AG. And then some other segment, the safe borders are like, he's out there picking up and detaining illegals. No AG's ever done it, right? So you do, and I was about to say for better or worse, because some of these judges really, even though they're Republicans, seem to be opposed to it. You have signature issues that I think have helped you advance tremendously through your career, which is both a function of bravery and the courage to do it and the gumption, and the intellect to execute. So politically, that seems to help you an awful lot. What about, I don't know, Hunt? What's going on with Wesley Hunt? He's a first-term congressman, is that right?
He's in his third year, so he just halfway through his second term, I think.
I just assumed he was kind of advanced by the TLR guys who all seem to be anti-KP, but I don't know that I want to, that's an accurate statement. I can't figure out where he falls in.
I don't know. I don't quite understand his path to victory or his theory, but I don't know him super well, and I'm mostly focused on running against John Cornyn. That's why I ran. I didn't run to run against Wesley Hunt. He got on October 1st. I was already in the race for 5-6 months in April. So I've really focused my efforts on John because John's the one that's done the damage. He's the one that's been there so long. Well, I mean, Wesley's kind of just getting started in his political career, so it's hard to assess how successful he'll be if he'd stayed in Congress or even trying to do this. I just don't have a way to measure him with his little, his short career. Whereas Cornyn, I can measure it. He's done a lot of really bad things, like, fighting to help Joe Biden restrict Second Amendment rights. He fought Trump on the border. I've got 20 clips of him criticizing the border wall. I've got at least 11 votes on amnesty. I've got him helping Joe Biden get the Afghans here. I've got many clips of him criticizing Trump running for president both in 2016 and 2024. So there's a lot of examples. And of course, the federal deficit when he got there, between the time of George Washington and when he got there, the deficit was $6.2 trillion. With his work, we're now at 38 trillion. So he's allowed that. He's funded it. He's spent money in Ukraine. He's spent money all over. He's never been a proponent of really cutting back the budget. And if he is, he's done a really poor job of executing, because we're much worse off under John Cornyn than we were between George Washington and John Cornyn.
Some of that I was aware of. I had forgotten about the gun rights issues and standing by Biden there. And
Biden stood by him. Biden thanked him for his great work on restricting Second Amendment rights.
Look, when people go out and communicate that, I bet it just collapses the campaign. That and those regurgitating the attacks on Trump as well. But we'll see. Hey, I want to take us to Jeff Leach, because there's 150 elected state reps, but I think he's yours. He's Collin County, and you and I share a commonality. He came out very aggressively attacking me. And for the listeners, this is a state rep, Collin County, Plano area, moderate state rep who was on the effort, in fact, gave closing arguments to try to impeach Ken Paxton, came out, called me a liar. I think he was drunk on X and everything else. And then he erased it all once it got truth tested and the things that I said. But 1.9 million, the last time I checked, from TLR, he's just picked up by TLR and kind of as their puppet. Can you tell us a little bit more about Jeff Leach? And
yeah.
Yeah.
I've known Jeff a long time. He was student body president at Baylor 20 years after me. So I met him when he was at Baylor, and then when he moved to Collin County, I helped him run for state rep the first time, and he had a promising start. He had a couple of really good sessions, fought Strauss, seemed to be on the right path, and then, I mean, it looks like to me that this idea of having perceived power from lobbyists and the leadership of the party at the time, Dade Phelan and others, that it's gone to his head, and he no longer really represents the constituents that he says he does. He represents, big lobby and himself, and he's all about, promoting himself. He doesn't take care of his constituents anymore, and he's let it go to his head. He's become a lot more arrogant and more just difficult. I find it's actually a sad thing to me, because I think he had a lot of ability, but he's literally you see it all the time. Politicians get changed by the environment. Well, he's one of those guys that he's the epitome of, he's the poster child for the guy that went there with good intentions, had a good heart, seemed like he was on the right path, and man, the power and the corruption just got to him.
The crumbling on policy just gives me pause, and I see it a lot. It lets me down. But with this guy, and then his attacks on me and others and people who are actually advancing conservative policy. Look, we got to wrap up. I know you need to head out, but let's talk a little bit about why the AG's office is, and this is Anthony Holm. If you just joined us, we're with Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas. You're listening to Politics with the Big Dogs. I want to ask you, before you head out, why is the AG's office so important? We have heard from you what you have done with it. There are 4 people running for Attorney General to replace you. What needs to happen with the next AG?
Look, I think we've taken the office in a different direction, probably outside the box a little more, but not outside of what the law allows. We've been creative in how we've done things, and you can see there's a real opportunity for this, because Texas is such a big state. It is the biggest Republican state. It has the most resources. We have the most conservative constituency that will not only promote, but allow and promote what we do. There's such an opportunity for Texas to be the state that steps in to save the country at times, to literally stop basically a despot from taking power that is not his, whether it's Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Congress when they passed Obamacare illegally. So I think it's really important who the next Attorney General is. As somebody that served in that position now for 11 years, nobody served in it longer except for Abbott. He served 12. I'll serve 12 by the time I'm done, but nobody's ever served longer than the two of us. And so I know this position well, and I know the people running well. I know all of them pretty well.
Well, thank you, General. And there you have it, listeners. If you want the activities and the conduct and the success of the last 11 years by probably the most aggressive, certainly President Trump said the most successful AG in America, then you have heard from the general himself, who needs to take that into the next 4-year effort. So thank you very much, General Paxton, for shutting down Backpage, coming and joining us today, for detaining illegals, and your strong leadership. Godspeed and good luck to you.
Hey, thank you, Anthony. I appreciate you having me on, and look forward to a resounding victory on March 3rd.
Folks, Anthony Holm here, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. We've just had awful lot of time with Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's in the middle of so much action, outlining what he's done, what he's currently doing. Thank you so much for joining us, General Paxton, and thank you, the listener. Sign up for all of our social media, Instagram, Facebook, Truth Social. Go to politicswiththebigdogs.com, join our newsletter, sign some of the petitions. We'll make sure those get forwarded to your elected officials. Stay engaged and stay in touch. You heard what the Attorney General Paxton said. You all are the ones who changed the Texas Court of Appeals. 3 of the 9, the only 3 up, are all swept out after they refused to allow our Attorney General to engage in voter fraud criminal investigations. So you guys did that. You are changing policy. Here are some of the things that we just heard from the Attorney General. We heard his success and his office success against a Google case and Facebook case. Facebook was out there stealing our voices, stealing our facial images. The taxpayer, I believe, got over $1 billion for each of these and didn't spend a penny. They largely outsourced it to excellent law firms for 10%, and those firms took all the risk. Makes a lot of sense to me. You heard that just in the last 2 weeks, the Attorney General's office was apprehending illegals in Houston and advancing them for deportation. I think this is the first Attorney General to ever do it, certainly the first one I've ever heard of doing it. I didn't understand that they had the power. And as we talked about immigration, for so long we all just wanted to close the border. But the great deterrent for people entering our country illegally is deporting them, right? That there's a real risk that they will be deported, and that's also a deterrent to the cartels. This deportation program really limits folks coming into our country and the cartel revenue stream of helping them come into our country illegally. We heard about the state's largest lobby group, TLR, Texans for Lawsuit Reform, how they were helping lead the now discredited impeachment effort of the Texas House against Ken Paxton. Forever and a day they had denied it, and what I learned today, it's the first time I'd ever heard it, that all of this came out in discovery. And discovery, of course, for the non-lawyers being, hey, we're going to send subpoenas so we can get evidence and collect evidence. And what Attorney General Paxton relayed to us was TLR ignored all of those subpoenas. There were valid subpoenas issued by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and TLR just simply ignored Dan Patrick's subpoenas. I'm shocked by that. It's the first time I had heard of it. Maybe you all were aware, but a lot of the evidence came in from other people. So other people who got subpoenas submitted the evidence, honored the subpoenas, and you saw direct email exchanges and advocacy by the leadership of Texans for Lawsuit Reform into the impeachment. And one example that was cited, and I think many of us saw this in the press as well, is one of the leaders of TLR was writing ghost opinion editorials for Rick Perry and anybody else, and was advocating, here, sign this and get it into the Wall Street Journal, so calling for the impeachment. That's probably, some of this was going on probably with Chip Roy, right? You heard about that. So really interesting things, new, some of the first times I was heard it and was aware of it. In addition to the Attorney General's discussion that we've had today, I want to flag for us what the U.S. Supreme Court did just a few days ago. They heard a case that many of you may be aware of about 2 of the states that had outlawed and banned, made it illegal for women who had, or men rather, who had gone through gender transitions, primarily is what's happening, to become women and then seek to participate in women's sports. 2 states, West Virginia and one of the others, a number of them have outlawed it. Texas has outlawed it in many instances, if not most instances, actually. Men are coming in, going through some type of transition, changing their name to Leah, for example, that well-known swimmer, and then entering women's sports and dominating them. Go figure, right? We have different body structures and generally stronger and faster and can create more force. It was Idaho and West Virginia, and each had a state law that prohibited formerly men, right, their birth certificates say born a boy, from transitioning to women or a girl and then participating in girls' sports. And I think many of us out there, certainly I was outraged some years ago. The best known was the Leah Thomas, the swimmer at UPenn, right? Go figure, it's an Ivy League. So this was a guy, I don't remember, Jason Thomas or something Thomas, who was also a swimmer, but he had never gotten over like 450th rank in the national efforts of what he swam. I believe it was the 200 meters. So then he goes through a sex change and declares himself as Leah and gets on to the women's swimming team. Well, he ends up winning Division I nationals in one of the events and setting UPenn records in 3 of the others. Just couldn't be happier, right? Here's this transitioned individual, born as a man, fully developed, who then goes through some type of sex transition and says, now I'm Leah, and I want to go compete, and clearly wanting to go to the Olympics and driven for this stuff. Shocking in its audacity, shocking in its desire to me, but I think most harmful on the women who are born women or born girls and spent their entire lives dedicated to this sport and were beaten by this fella. I mean, it's just fundamentally wrong. Think about NBA guys declaring themselves as women and going through some type of transition and going into the women's NBA. It would just be a devastating outcome, right? And it'd be devastating primarily because all of the women who spent their entire lives building up to this moment and this opportunity are being defeated by somebody who's clearly biologically stronger and faster and different bone structures and bone densities and just has tremendous advantages. Generally, a man has tremendous advantages on a woman when it comes to us participating in sports. So what's happened? Judges at the federal level have overturned the state laws in Idaho and West Virginia and said, no, you have to give parity. You have to let somebody born as a boy compete in women's sports. And that's why it ends up with the U.S. Supreme Court. I think they're going to do the right thing. I think they're, as you listen to what was said in the testimony and the questions by the justices, but it was not lost on me that yet again, the Supreme Court Chief Justice, who was appointed by George W. Bush, the Bushes just have a long history of putting real moderate judges in the court. He was clearly asking questions in a way to narrowly rule. So it didn't apply to all things and wanting to leave space and trying to distinguish between, well, what if a boy transitioned before he went through puberty? Would it really be that different? I mean, look, I'm not a doctor, but my gut is yes, absolutely. And the father of daughters, 100%. So, look, we all have to stay engaged, even though they're Republicans and even the so-called conservative court. John Roberts, the Chief Justice, is out there continuing to make mischief. And frankly, he didn't become reasonably conservative until we got a majority of the court. And how it works is the Chief Justice, if he's siding with the majority of the court, then he decides who writes the opinion. And that's a lot of power, right? And how to narrow it. And I suspect that they're going to make a ruling that supports what you and I believe, that it'll be narrowly tailored, and it'll leave an awful lot of opportunity for the trans community and the radical activists to bring a new case for a boy who transitions before he completes puberty or perhaps goes into puberty. And we should all be thinking and watching for that. In fact, we didn't talk to Ken Paxton about it, but my understanding is his office recently brought an investigation into some school districts on the north side of Austin and the Metroplex that were allowing female athletes, these so-called self-identified female athletes, to compete in girls' sports. So I think this is happening in Texas. Sadly, my understanding is it's straight up illegal, but it doesn't mean that these government-run schools won't continue to break the law as they have many, many times before. So this is Anthony Holm thanking you again for engaging, listening, being a warrior for liberty and the values that we love. And we want to send a thank you again to Attorney General Paxton for joining us. And we'll try to get some more of these elected officials on the show. Thank you, and God bless Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Learn more about today's guest and hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.